Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience of SmithWeekly, including Jason B., Paul M., Harry C., Johanna A., and Thomas N. Returning guest on the program today, Mr. Daniel Major is with us. Daniel is the Chief Executive Officer at Goviex Uranium, a Niger and Zambia-focused conventional uranium project developer advancing the Madaouela and Muntanga uranium projects towards construction. Goviex is listed on the Toronto Venture Exchange under the symbol GXU, as well as on the US OTC markets under the symbol GVXXF. Mr. Major, thank you for coming back on the podcast. It's been a while. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great, and thanks for the invite. Always enjoy these discussions.
Yeah, Daniel, likewise. It's been a while since we've done a formal podcast here, and always appreciate you having you back. Well, why don't we get right to it here, as we have a number of things to discuss. And of course, I'll refer the audience back to prior discussions on background past events for the company. But you just got done with the WNA conference in London. What are your thoughts
Yep.
coming out of that meeting?
Oh, I was at the Hague conference, and I thought they were bullish at the Hague conference just before the summer break. I mean, they're even more bullish at the WNA conference. I mean, really highlighted by their latest nuclear fuel supply. I mean, you're looking at generation capacity going up, from 391 gigawatts now to 444 gigawatts by 2030, and then 686 gigawatts by 2040. That goes from 170 million pounds demand up to 337 million pounds. And that now includes SMRs. And against that, after 2028, they're having to put in maybe pounds from somewhere, and hoping that pounds will come up from somewhere to fill the gap. And they've included every single plan and prospective project as well. So, increasing expectation on demand, but no clear new projects available to fill the gap. Getting very bullish in nuclear as a general. They had representatives from the US government, the UK government there, highlighting where their strengths were and where they were going forward. There was a very long list of new countries that had entered the nuclear space or were planning on entering the nuclear space. So very, very exciting, I think, for our industry as a whole. I think the biggest concern remains the overall supply side, which is, if it's getting this good, how do we keep up with it? How do we make sure that all the components for nuclear builds come through on time, that, we don't continue to have issues that delay construction and put those risks out there. But I think the key message was we're getting increasing political support, whether it's government support for the construction or increasing focus on financial support. So yeah, a very bullish approach from WNA. There were some 700 people there. It was the busiest I've ever seen it.
Lots of inputs coming in from various parties on our side as well on some of the key insights coming out of that conference. And of course, as you said, there's a lot of unanswered questions that unfortunately are going to have answers one way or the other as we progress down through the rest of the decade here. Now, 6.5 years yet to go here. Why don't we move on straight to Niger here? That's in the minds of a lot of the uranium community and is one of the fresher events that's happened as well. Just another layer on of the problems in this sector. But how about just an update on what you're getting on the ground in Niger, Daniel? And then also, have you been to the country since the power struggle started?
Before I answer that question, I think you kind of alluded to it there. I mean, Niger is an interesting one because it highlights that problem that the industry overall has, which is nothing's guaranteed, with regarding when supply will come online, and that there are a number of risks sitting out there on the supply side, and Niger is obviously part of that. And I'll answer your question in a minute on that. But also, Cameco announces that, they're not meeting their production targets, and are, having issues in getting up and running. You have Peninsula, of course, who have had to re-engineer their project after the contract changes they've had to go through. So, I think that's one of the issues as well that was highlighted during the conference, which is, yeah, we need all of this new supply, but it's all got to turn up on time, and be achieved. And there are all of those overall risks associated with it. With regarding Niger, I think the key highlight here really was it was just a surprise for everybody that it actually occurred. It was not expected by any government institutions. There was no triggers out there. If you looked at other countries in the region that have gone through these changes, you've had demonstrations on the streets weeks prior or months prior, going through, complaining about things. You've had multiple changes in government up and running before that, a military coup comes through and takes over the governance. So I think that's one of the key things that's very different here. I think the other thing is very different in relation to Niger is that the way that ECOWAS has responded. They put sanctions onto Mali, but they were relatively low level, or you could get around them. The sanctions that have been placed on Niger have been very abrupt, very brusque in their approach. They have literally shut the country down. There is no access, or there was no access at all into the country, unless you were trying to come in through Mali and Burkina Faso. That included air transport. Only last week did we have air transport embargoes get lifted, so now technically you can fly in. So to your last part, no, because it was literally not possible to get into the country until last week by anybody. That change has come through. The impact of those sanctions have been substantive. You've seen it from a uranium production point of view only last week, at the end of last week, where Orano has finally had to shut down its operations at Somaya because it has not got any consumables left, or appropriate number of consumables left to continue its operations, and it's reverting to its planned maintenance program. And that applies to the whole country. So it's having to survive on what it can produce internally. You've seen a sharp rocketing of food inflation going through in the southern parts of the country, where you rely on imports of electricity from Nigeria, substantial amount of power cuts running through the country. The government has been, well, most of the banks they're not functioning properly either, because ECOWAS controls most of the banking system. And so bank transfers are very difficult, to the point we're having to make payments of some of our pay by cash instead. It's the only way to do it, and even cash is limited on access. So it is, from that point of view, very difficult. But the government that has been formed. You have a minister of mines, you have a minister of environment, and the minister of the other departments are all there. We know our minister of mines well from the past. We're able to continue to work with them. So, in country, we're able to continue dealing with the ministries as we go forward. But obviously, with the constraints that are out there, very difficult to do much more than continue with the administrative side with the government. So we are continuing to update our ESIA because we changed things with the feasibility study, continuing to work with the Minister of Mines on that side of the admin side of our project.
A lot of moving parts here, a lot of difficulties, and it's tough to get straight information, whether you're in country or not in country. I think it's very difficult to manage the various parties you have here and the various interests. And so I think these things are tough. Just to continue on this a little bit more, what are your thoughts? Just we've seen the various positions on both sides here, and there's obviously still information coming in, and again, it's tough to sort out and make sound decisions on what needs to happen, and of course investing decisions on top of that, and then also the fact that there's a time frame that's attached to this as well. But what do you think it's at the core here? Is it the desired exit of the French from Niger? Is this related to a social issue? Is it pipeline construction? Essentially, the East and the West, yet another place on the map to have a struggle over interests. What can you say? What do you think is at the core of this?
From what we could see going into this and from where we've seen it develop, this is not an East-West geopolitical forced coup. That's not what we've got here. I believe this is internal politics within the country. It is an attempt to get a transition of power. Whether that is successful or otherwise, we'll wait to see how that comes around. As a result of the coup, it has become very clear that Niger is very important to global geopolitics, though. The work being undertaken and the efforts being undertaken, particularly by the US government, importantly, and the EU and the UK to find a resolution um, is paramount to what is going to happen here. Against that, you have the actions by ECOWAS themselves, and I think it's very important to recognize that ECOWAS is being headed by the president of Nigeria. It is very clear that within the Western states of Africa, nobody wants to see a potentially weakened Niger. We've seen what has happened in other jurisdictions as a result of military change in government. The increase in number of tax has become an issue, and nobody wants to see that happen because there's potentially a knock-on effect. So they want to see strong government within this jurisdiction, and Niger was doing a fantastic job of dealing with the security issues around here, particularly when you look at the success it had had supporting Nigeria against Boko Haram, which really had become, a very quiet situation and really no attacks at all, and it gone very well. It was actually going very well on the west side as well. So I think there's a lot of support there. This I do see being very much an internal issue between parties for whatever reasons. But I think it's also important to recognize that we need stable government from this point onwards. And I think that probably remains the biggest risk at the moment in this situation is we don't have that delivered to date.
Very well. And just with this, obviously, you have to ask the question about timing. And for me, looking at that timing to see a resolution to the problems, because I'm not in the camp of this gets resolved quickly, just simply based on recent other events. When I say recent, over the last, call it 5 to 10 years, but just referring over to a place like Sudan, for example, not far away, and also places like Syria. These problems don't seem to resolve quickly, but I'd like to just get your thought on what you see there in terms of a timeline to resolve. I know it's very, speculative at this point, but is this something that you think resolves in the next, call it 18 to 24 months, or do we see something that's even longer than that?
I personally am optimistic, Andrew. I think one of the biggest differences here compared to the ones you noted and what we saw in Mali and Burkina Faso is the stranglehold that ECOWAS has created over this country. Nothing is getting in. So a lot of people who are relying on those imports are under serious pressure. As I say, the banking system is not really functioning properly because ECOWAS controls the majority of those banks. There's not enough, nothing, no, nothing's being gained from a tax point of view. I mean, I think the president Bazoum had wrote an early letter to the international community highlighting that over 40% of the national budget of Niger relied on international funding to get through. With a company like Orano closing, one, not being able to ship its uranium, and now actually not being able to produce its uranium, any royalties that they would have been able to pay to the government are no longer payable because they're not selling anything, and the royalties are obviously on the sales process. So you've got a government here that is financially really struggling. And I think that's very different to what you have seen elsewhere, where that level of sanctions didn't achieve that. So the government still had income coming through. In case of Mali, obviously a decent income still coming from the gold producers, etc. I think that's the biggest difference here, Andrew, that compared to others, they don't want this thing to hang around. They want to get a resolution, and hence the reason why I remain optimistic that if ECOWAS can continue what it's doing, I think we will see a change. I think we are starting to see increasing and balancing the real news and the false news is obviously part of the challenge all the time here. But certainly, if I looked at the bits of information that come my way, you've had state employees not paid since July, and in some cases, some have, but a lot haven't. That causes disruption. You've had massive increases of cost of living. A lot of people's livelihood has been cut off by sanctions. And as a result, we're starting to see an increasing amount of negative commentary from inside about the new government. We saw initially these massive rallies, and recent images of rallies are a lot smaller than we've seen before. And it could just be timing and cameras. But I think we are reaching that point where the country internally has got to settle itself, and that hasn't happened. You've seen, particularly on the eastern side of the country, a number of increasing marches, which are actually not just negative to the change, but actually pro the previous president. So that is not something I've seen in other places, like where we're in Mali when we had the coup there. So I think there are some changes here. How it all resolves and how long, I'm optimistic that we will get a resolution. We need a resolution. I think the point I've made to others on this one as well. One thing about military governments is they're not nationalistic and they're not socialist. They like to keep their mining industries operating and going forward. So I don't think that part of it's an issue, but I think we just need some clear lines of stability to go forward with.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate the comments there and your views on it. And it's very just really sad and unfortunate for the local people there. I think that's really where the damage comes in. Aside from the investment community, but just for the local people, I think it's just absolutely terrible what's happened here. And hopefully there is a quick resolve, and that people can see what economics and things like capitalism can do to hopefully get things restarted, get back on the right track. And hopefully it does not go the way of significant long periods of time of ruin, which we have seen in similar cases. Not exactly the same, of course, as you noted. We definitely have a number of cases to look at either in the past or currently ongoing in the world. Well, why don't we move into Goviex specifically here and talk just some details here to get kicked off, and just talk about the challenges that lie ahead. But why don't you first update us on the capital structure here, Daniel, in terms of current shares outstanding, the cash on hand, major shareholders, and also if you see the need to do any equity financing before year end.
I'll tell you what we have. We currently are sitting with 726 million shares on issue. Difficult to give you a breakdown on major shareholders other than the management. We had a couple of major investors come through on the last fundraise. We've got Denison still at 4.5, insiders are at 11. We have a very large OBO list. It's about 65% of all of our investors, so can't really give you much clarity beyond that. We obviously did that fundraise earlier in the year. Would not be correct of me without financial disclosures out there on financial statements to tell you what we currently have. But let's put it this way: we recognize where we are and are continuing to keep things as lean and mean as we can. And I think this is a useful point for me just to caveat in. The UXC put a report out about, I think it was their last quarter report. It mapped funds raised by uranium developers 2019 to 2023. And I was very pleased to see that Goviex was at the bottom of that pile. We've raised less money than our peers. And we've done that for all three projects to be moved through. We've taken one all the way through its final feasibility study. And we've got another one getting close to that as well. So, we are very lean in what we try and do and achieve with the funds that we do get from investors.
Obviously with the issues going on here, it makes sense to try to conserve as much as you guys can here, just because of course, valuation. It's been very difficult to get Madaouela developed, of course, and just like any project, it's not just Madaouela, but any project, whether it's in Niger or elsewhere. And of
Exactly.
course, many challenges lie ahead. The construction financing hurdle, things like commissioning, construction delays, lead times on equipment, materials. Of course, technical expertise, as you know, continues to plague the industry. And we've said this before, and with others, other people have said this. Mining uranium is just really hard work, and even the best out there that folks look up to in this sector have confirmed that mining uranium is difficult. And so, of
Yeah.
course, you layer on a power debacle like what we see in Niger that's ongoing here, makes it worse on a number of fronts, including financing. And of
Yeah.
course, with that comes a lower valuation that we've seen. As you've clearly noted here and have seen, Daniel, that we've seen valuation actually with Goviex hold up better than peer company Global Atomic in this particular case, which a number of reasons for that. But how are you pushing forward at this point? And are there potentially strategic partners being considered to assist with the development of Madaouela?
Well, before I do that, let's just remember as well, Goviex has two projects. We have Muntanga as well. So, we need to make sure that we put that in reference. So, unlike many of our peers, we have two development uranium projects. And I hear you on the difficulties of developing uranium projects. I think that applies to almost all mining at the moment. Just mining in general is difficult to do, and it isn't made any easier across the world, no matter what commodity you want to go through. I think one point I would make here is that we continue to work with where we were on the financing side of this. I see us looking very much at a delay process than anything else here. And the only answer I can really give you on that is that this is a political decision at the end of the day. We highlighted that earlier in presentations that a lot of our conversations were with export credit agencies and DFIs. Once they make their decision, they're very sticky. They tend to go with you all the way. And I don't think that position has changed. And certainly I've received no other feedback than that. And we wait really to see where this whole process in Niger settles out, depending on how international politics resolves itself with Niger, will depend very much on how we'll be able to structure ourselves going forward with Niger. On your issue of finding strategic partners, again, that layers in another bunch of geopolitical questions. And at the moment, it's not something we're looking to achieve. East west does not always meet in the middle. And I think we still have opportunities here to take this project forward the way we were, and we were being very successful in getting there. We now just have to literally give it time on the ground to see where we settle out.
Yeah, I think that's a logical approach here. Yeah, lots of difficulties with finding strategic partners. And, of course, some of those more sophisticated strategic partners, Daniel, this is a joke, but so some of them are looking at the ESG scores in Niger, and those aren't looking too good. So,
Well, you say that, but there's many components to ESG. Interesting. Joking aside, Somalia is actually a ISO 14000 and 9001 mine. So the geopolitics may be interesting, but from an operating point of view, the uranium mines in Niger are run to international standards.
yeah,
So we deal with the other part, and I agree with you on that. This coup has not helped. One thing I was always proud of with Niger was the way, since I've been operating there, the government has been transparent, easy to work with, stable law, etc. This has obviously made it very difficult for us, but we will see where we end up and where we move to the next stage.
Yes, of course. No, I appreciate you playing along with that. It's always interesting, some of these various things that come up. And of course, certifications, another conversation for us to have another time on experience and quality, and whether or not those experience quality things like reasonable course of business and performing properly need a certification or a
Yep.
specification attached to them. That's a different conversation. But just on this, a little bit more on the financing part of it, we know that financiers are looking differently at Niger now than they were months ago in terms of risk. And of course, you always have question of discount rates in jurisdictions like Niger versus maybe other jurisdictions that people deem more stable and safe. Any updates just on the financing environment, or any conversations that you can talk about? Of course, I know these are sensitive, but any maybe insights for the audience in terms of the financing environment, Daniel? And then also another thing that I think sometimes people forget that have happened in the past, offtake with prepayments.
Let's deal with the financing side first. I think many of my comments already about patience apply to the financing community as well. We were in a very good position just before this all kicked off at the end of July. We were well covered. The feedback we got from the export credit agencies and the DFIs that we had our letters with was just let us wait to see where our sovereign governments end up with at the end of this process. And beyond that, there's not much else you can have a conversation. You have to let these kind of government entities just work through their process. If everything resolves as they would like to see it resolve, and each of them has their own political positioning on this, then I don't see that being a risk. And in fact, if it works out the way they want it to work out, you can see governmental commitments actually rise. And I think that's one of the optimistic sides of this as well, which is if the external parties that are backing export credit agencies and DFIs are supportive of where we end up, then they were already trying to support Niger considerably. Then I can see a doubling down on that position and even more support to help this country develop and go forward as a region. So there is a lot in the balance here, but I can see there's as much positive here as anything else. Yeah, on prepaid offtakes, not something we're really seeing. I mean, the last guys who did a prepaid offtake got seriously burned and wouldn't ever consider another one. And it almost has put them off new developers and completely. They're starting to change slightly in the way they're looking at things, but they are a company that have a heavy onerous on ESG as well. Very heavy, probably one of the most aggressive on the ESG side. But the scale of prepaid, I don't think we're seeing at the moment out there. And utilities are definitely, though, very open to conversation. I mean, even with ourselves at the WNA, we had a number of conversations on this issue. We continue to respond to RFPs, but there is very clearly a understanding that Africa has got to be part of that diversification for a lot. I mean, if you look at Euroatom's last report, I mean, 25% of their material comes out of Niger, but then the others are Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Russia, and Canada. So diversification is definitely something that Europe is looking to consider how it can keep doing it. But there are only so many places you can diversify to within the uranium industry.
Yeah, good point. And there's only so many chocolate chip cookies left on the plate, Daniel. And that's, I think,
Absolutely.
I think the jury's still out on this, on the various means and methods in terms of getting some of these projects over the finish line in the coming years. Going to be very difficult, and I think the difficulties have started to show up. I think there's more to come, which is very positive, and I think that's what you get after 10 plus years of just absolute negative for the sector the entire time. And so I think we've got the pipeline loaded really well going forward here. Overall highlights of the broken nature of the sector. With the Niger problems, as you alluded to earlier, Goviex is not necessarily just a one-trick pony, but maybe there's a little bit more there in terms of the pipeline that Goviex has.
Yeah.
Is there a plan to shift some of the focus to Zambia and potentially advance Muntanga as the starter project? We know that there's delays in Niger at this point and the potential for more, but Muntanga is not a bad little project. It's in Zambia, which obviously has experience with, certainly on the transport side, with respect to uranium.
Yep.
What do you have to say there? What do you think?
Well, I mean, we've always been running these two projects on a parallel track, and our emphasis has always been to keep Madaouela ahead and Zambia about 2 years behind, simply because we didn't want to try and build two projects at exactly the same time. As you'll have seen from our news announcements, Muntanga is motoring its way through its FS at the moment, and obviously, part of the strategy here with what's going on and the uncertainty that's currently sitting with us with Niger is that, yeah, absolutely that there's nothing to slow Zambia down. Our target is to get that FS out, by the summer of next year. We have just updated our mineral resource estimate. We saw the total pounds go up. We saw the grade improve as part of the infill drilling. We've gone back again now that we have those optimal pits that come out of there that define the mineral resource estimate. We're now infill drilling some more. So there was some inferred left over, mainly because the pits went slightly deeper and slightly wider than we were expecting them to. So we'd been drilling in what we thought was the final pit. But because the resource got bigger, those final pits got bigger, and we suddenly realized that we had more inferred to go back and drill. So we obviously want to do that because we'd like to benefit the feasibility study with as much pounds as we can. We're ongoing with the test work that needs to be done to just verify the metallurgy. I mean, we didn't do the original metallurgy back in 2008, 2009. That was obviously done by Denison and Africa Energy at the time. So we're verifying that. We've got an ESIA update running down there at the moment as well, because the Dibwe East deposit, which is now more than half of the resource, was not included and now needs to be brought into any permitting that's going on down there as well. So that keeps moving along steadily. It's well within its time frame. You obviously can only go so fast. I mean, because there are so many components that fit together within a feasibility study that some things just can't start until something else is done. So I think summer next year is a decent time frame. I think what we will see change, though, if we don't get any clarity, is we will advance a lot quicker into the financing side of Zambia than we probably would have done. And I think the one thing that became clear is that from a jurisdictional point of view, we probably have a wider net that we can cast. We cast the net wide for Madaouela anyway, but a number of financing entities that we approached, it wasn't the fact, it was just they just don't do Niger. I mean, they don't have any banking in there. I mean, there aren't that many banks in Niger. So, some banks, particularly African banks, if they don't have a presence, will not lend. So with Zambia, that changes a lot, particularly with the Southern African banks. There's a larger range of them. A lot of them looked at it and they just said, sorry, but we just don't go that high up in Africa to be able to finance on that. But Zambia falls well within their basket.
Yeah, I think Zambia is a nice little additional asset that the company has to lean on right now, especially with the uncertainty in Nigeria. Madaouela is a great project and can work really well with some of the pricing that we're expecting to see going forward in the sector. But I think the Zambia approach and increased focus as you guys wait, I think that completely makes sense to look at, Daniel. And it's good that you guys have that second project there. And
It's a very
yeah,
good project. It's very simple. It's got very low acid consumption in a country that produces acid out of the copper belt. As you said, there's already been experience of the transport of uranium. We threw from Kylokaria through to Walvis Bay. The government is working very closely with us on the radiation side. Some of it's new, but they're very keen to see diversification. The government as a whole, is very pro mining and wants to see new, and that includes us as well. There's a lot of exploration upside there, and at some point we'll probably come to valuation, but I'll raise it here and I can raise it again later. I can double up on my comment, but we're trading, at a $65 uranium price. Muntanga comes up to about $190 million NPV. We're like the high 20s IRR. we're trading about a third of that value at the moment, on an NAV basis. So, at the moment we're undervalued just on our holding, in my view, on Muntanga, and Madaouela risk is fully priced in to this stock at the moment.
Well, I think we're pretty clear on just your guys' view on your investment in Niger, and of course the moving Madaouela forward in Niger. I think that's pretty clear based on what you've said here and what you guys would normally do here, just in the situation that we have with Niger. And then obviously the government relations you spoke to earlier, knowing the Minister of Mines and some of the parties there, and of course having to balance with the various parties and the potential for those parties to change quite quickly as this issue goes on. Just back to valuation here, Daniel. Do you see that the current share price is an opportunity to buy shares from a management and board position to increase their positions? And then with that, just also talk about how you see incentives and how you are rewarded to make this company become a success at the end.
Yeah, I do. And I think, there is opportunities for us here as well. I obviously have my shares. Some people would say I don't have enough, but I also have my options that are sitting there. They are worth something, particularly if there's a transaction. As you know, options get bought out as well. So there is an incentive for me here to get that share price up and drive through on these projects. And as I just pointed out, we're not even seeing the value of Muntanga built into our project at all. And I think that's something we just kind of don't get why. I don't think people give Muntanga enough credit. It is a fantastic project in a safe jurisdiction going forward. We don't have a massive bonus scheme. We keep everything as lean as mean. As a company, it's very much a focus of getting the right things out of our management, and they do. They're very incentivized here to make it happen. And you can speak to we have a small management team as well, and we've only got 6 people in the whole of management. We cross cover on many things to make sure that we're constructive there. And from my point of view, I'm also, anyone can look at our annual accounts, and there's a clause in there. If I can do a great transaction here, I'm also incentivized. Therefore, I want the value of these projects to be as high as I can damn well get them, because it's to my value as well.
Look at the various ways that people can be incentivized here. And, there's a lot of other parts and pieces that go into this. I think sometimes folks get a little bit out of control in the sense that, there's insider buying at this point. And what is that in proportion to the wealth of that insider? How is the various other pieces play into that consideration? And I think sometimes there's a little bit of tunnel vision that happens there with respect to that. I'd like to get your other comments here that you wanted to mention before we wrap up. But I also want to just ask this one as well, audience question, off topic from what we were just discussing, but just back kind of bigger picture, your position on climate change, and is commercial nuclear power part of that solution? And then just with that, couple in, are humans fully responsible for climate change, or do we have the inability, or not the capacity as humans, given we only live 80 to 100 years roughly, to really comprehend climate change, in the sense that if you were a geologist, and of course, Daniel, I'm not saying you're a
No,
mining
I'm a mining
engineer,
edge.
but
That,
but of
that is so.
course, yeah, you're a mining engineer, but of course, from a geologist perspective, we look at deposit formations that take hundreds of years, if not much, much more than that, to form. And then also that we haven't done a good job of keeping records. But climate change is certainly something that has happened over a much bigger picture in terms of thousands of years, if not much more, of course. So just your comments on that before we go.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this has to come as my opinion of how I see it. I think the way I look at it, and you're right. I mean, you can hunt the internet for all sorts of things, and I did find a piece on something archaic as the measurements of carbon and ice over time. And if you look at over a long enough period of time, it's very difficult to see where all those different shifts are. But there are periods clearly where temperatures go up and carbon emissions are related to it. And obviously all of the research out there is from 1850 or something as that nominal benchmark of the industrial start of the industrial. I suppose from my point of view, look, just walking around, things are getting hotter, weather systems are getting more extreme, whether that's, related totally to man-made carbon emissions, or we're looking at a shift of, where the planet is and its path. I find there's got to be a balance there. But I think at the end of the day, we've had an industrial revolution. We as humans have got to take responsibility for the planet we're sitting on, no matter what, whether it is all going to be piled onto climate change or not. We at the end of the day have a responsibility not only for ourselves but for our generations to come. And we have an anti-smoking league for a reason. You can't be sucking cigarettes into your lungs and expect not to get cancer. The same applies to many other areas. But I think there has to be a pragmatism out there of how to achieve what we're trying to achieve. Do I think going to zero emissions is the right thing? I think moving in that direction is clearly the right thing to do. You can't keep putting pollution out up into the sky forever. I mean, the same way that we got rid of high sulfur coals because Scandinavia, when we were burning high sulfur coals here in the UK, was finding acid rain. So there is knock-on effects of our industry that we have, and cutting emissions, whatever emissions are that are out there, you're trying to do. And same as we on our projects look aggressively of how can we reduce our water consumption, even in jurisdictions where we have water. But water is becoming a major asset out there in the world going forward, and needs to be protected. So I think this is very much part of it. But I think the one thing I am very supportive of is the nuclear industry and what it's trying to achieve. In fact, we've changed our corporate presentation depending on when I'm presenting, and the first 6-7 slides of that presentation now literally go through why I think nuclear should be part of the whole change. I mean, I don't know if you saw recently, but the UK government had no bids for offshore wind because the offshore wind, which portrays to be a cheap industry, needs so many bloody subsidies that it realizes that the government's capping them out now and saying, well, no, you've got to pay a sensible price, and you're locking them in. And what the wind industry has done here in the UK is bid cheap and then fight for higher prices later. So it gets in and then demands higher prices. And the government said, no, no more you're doing that. You're fixing your price and you're accepting it. So I think what we find with nuclear is that it is one of the lowest emitters for carbon. It's one of the safest forms. It is incredibly low cost over the life of the capital invested. Particularly now, reactors are getting pushed out to long life. I mean, at WNA, they're talking about reactors going out to 100 years in life. So no matter what you've invested at the front, if you can depreciate that over 100 years, that's a great return on your investment going forward. But I think, the key is it's there all of the time. We looked at in our project, and just give you from a small concept, renewables, we looked at solar as part of Madaouela. Obviously, we're in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Why would you not look at solar energy to kind of reduce your risk on supply? Because obviously we were taking off the grid, which is controlled by Niger. We looked at doing batteries, and it was more expensive to put batteries in than to burn diesel, and that's where the issue I have with a lot of the renewables. They've got to be there for a reason, but you need base load, and the only base load that I can see that works at the moment that's new and renewable is going to be nuclear.
Very well. I appreciate opinions on all of this, Daniel, and it's always great to get them from our guests as we talk about these issues. And of course, I'm going to keep my comments pretty limited on this, just in the sense that, I think people have to look at the facts, and I think they have to look at the data, and I think they have to question some of the narratives that are put out. And I think if you start there and you follow the money, I think those are all very good places and good advice for people to look at this, look at these issues. Obviously, you and I are in full agreement with commercial nuclear power is obviously a very, very good solution. And of course, the lead times and the costs have gotten out of hand simply because of bureaucracy and specifications that don't need to be there.
Yeah.
But
You say
that's
that,
obviously.
but the Chinese are building them on time and on budget.
Mhm.
ENEC presented at the WNA on time and on budget. So it is possible to build nuclear reactors on time and on budget. We've just got to figure out how to do it in our Western world and stop mucking around and get with the process. And, the regulators, suppliers, builders, nuclear utilities have all got to get aligned. And it is
Very,
achievable
yeah.
because clearly other jurisdictions are doing it.
That is correct. And that was what I was referring to as predominantly most of your Western jurisdictions, unfortunately, as you would say, mucking it up. You look at our competition and they're doing a much better job, and very, very fascinated and very much happy with what the UAE has been able to put together at Baccarat. Great project and a model for many people to follow. I suppose we'll leave it there for now. We could keep talking, of course, but for the sake of time, I'll let you get on with your day and, of course, mine. But
Thank you.
for potential investors who are listening in, the company has a market capitalization of about 98 million Canadian dollars. Why should Goviex be considered within the institutional, family office, and retail investors' portfolio, given the events and at this stage in the cycle?
As we already highlighted, I mean, let's just go to the valuation. I mean, you're getting a really excellent project in Muntanga already at a big discount. We have got our flagship out there at Madaouela still. I still remain optimistic of where we are, but you're getting that for free, an optionality going forward. You know, we're a company that are going to be sitting. We have the 2 permitted projects we can develop forward. We've shown our ability to work in Africa going forward. And then, of course, the commodity side is just getting stronger and stronger, and the leverage is sitting there. So, you know, we're a company that I believe is massively discounted, and has very much the leverage to come around as an entity. And we'll show that with our ability to move Muntanga forward. And as I say, I think Madaouela will come around and we'll get that as well.
And Daniel, how can they contact the company?
The best way is to come through our info one. So that's info@goviex.com. And my head of corporate communications, Isabel, looks after that and makes sure that I see all of them and reply to them.
Excellent. Well, Daniel, always good to catch up. We appreciate your continued efforts at Goviex. Looking forward to following this and all the issues in Niger, of course, as well with it. Best of luck, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you very much. And thanks for the opportunity to answer some of these questions.